But welcome to the official launch of Don Nelson's latest book, Little Girl Found: How I Reclaimed Myself After Early Childhood Trauma. My name is Matthew Felix, and I had the honor of designing the cover as well as publishing the book with Don, which has been, like I said, an honor and a lot of fun as well. And we're really excited to get the book out into the world starting today. So again, thank you. Thank you for being here today. And I wanted to mention that we have attendees not only from the United States, but from Germany, France, England, Canada, Japan. I think Switzerland was also on the list. So if you're staying up really late or getting up really early, thanks for that as well. We appreciate it. Okay, good. A little bit about the format. So we're going to start. Dawn is going to read an excerpt to kind of set the mood and kind of set the tone for what the book's about. She's going to read that from the foreword. Or the preface. And the preface, yeah, I always get forward, preface, and prologue mixed up. But I'll be interviewing 4 people then who have been involved in getting the book out into the world, who helped Dawn along the way. Then I'll be interviewing Dawn, and then Dawn will take questions at the end of the hour. So if you have questions, the way we're going to do that is through Zoom's chat functionality. I know that most of us have been on a lot of Zoom meetings over the course of the pandemic, but there's always a few people who aren't familiar with the functionality. So I want to touch on that just really briefly. If you go to the bottom of your screen and hover over the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see a chat icon. If you click on that chat icon, a chat window pops out for me to the right. And in the bottom then, you can type a message. So I'm just saying hello, and everyone will see that message. And so that's what we're going to do. And feel free to submit questions over the course of the event, and then I will peruse those questions, or you can save them to the end either way. But then Dawn will take those questions at the end. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is that you probably want to view today's meeting in speaker view. You can watch in gallery view if you want, but that's where you see all the people. I usually like to watch these sorts of things where I'm just focused on the speaker. And in order to do that, on my screen at least, you go to the upper right. There's an icon. If you hover over the upper right, there's an icon that says view. And if you click on that, you see speaker, gallery, and immersive. And so if you click on speaker, that will ensure that whoever's talking is who you see. So thanks again for being here today. Let's dive right in. I am still letting in a few people. So like I said, I'll probably be bouncing back and forth a little bit as people continue to show up. But I want to start now with, most of you know Dawn probably in some capacity, but some of you might not. And some of you might know, like I said, in different capacities. So I did want to formally introduce Dawn to all of you. Dawn Nelson spent the first few years of her life in Kentucky, grew up in Kansas, and graduated from colleges in Nebraska and Texas before landing in California in 1968. Her journey took her from minister's wife and mother to graduate school, to professional actress, to massage practitioner, to meditation teacher and residential retreat leader. And something tells me there's even more on that list. Completion of a 2-year certification course in Awakening to Life and Death in 1990 inspired Dawn to create her Compassionate Touch for Those in Later Life Stages program. She is now semi-retired, and she lives with her husband, Barry, in the San Francisco Bay Area, where she continues to write, deepen her meditative practices, and spend as much time as possible with her 3 adult children, 4 grandchildren, and last but certainly not least, her 3 grand dogs. Welcome, Dawn.
I got to say, I'm a little overwhelmed at the moment. I just feel so blessed to see everyone and people I didn't know were coming even, and my whole family here, almost, I think. I see my grandson's name on here even. Thank you so much for being here. It's very emotional to see you all and to feel, I feel so honored that you came today. And some of you I haven't seen in years, in person. And some of you I might not see for a long time again in person. So thank you for being here so much. I'm supposed to read from the preface now.
And now you get to read from the preface. Yeah. So take a deep breath and thank you for that. And yeah, when you're ready, if you could read from the preface, that'd be great.
One balmy May evening, sitting in a lush and sweet-smelling garden with a few old and new friends, I heard my youngest adult daughter speaking about my first few years of life. As my husband cut in a couple times to correct or expand on some detail or other, I noted that my loved one's retelling of a story shared with them in bits and pieces through the years and refiltered through their perceptions, differed somewhat from what I considered my story. The script in my head about a barely 1-year-old child left alone in her crib for 3 days and nights, finally rescued by police after calls from concerned neighbors, was spawned from a few primary source materials and my paternal grandmother's, memories. Each retelling, along with my changing thoughts and beliefs as decades passed, added weight to the storyline. If you repeat a tale often enough, whether it's to ourselves or to others, it gains traction, affecting the way we think and feel about ourselves. We believe the story. We identify with the story. It influences our behaviors and the choices we make in life. Yet at some point, we begin to understand that whatever may have taken place, it is our thoughts about those events that keep replaying the movie in our heads. Writing Little Girl Found supported me in uncovering and exploring a wounding that I had never fully and consciously accepted. My writing process intensified as memories took on new meaning from my current perspective, awakening energy that had been stuck in my body much of my life. It became increasingly therapeutic as I uncovered ways in which my early trauma had influenced my personality and habitual behaviors. The pursuit became more healing as I listened to, embraced, and reconciled with the wounded child inside me. An endeavor more demanding and intense than I could have imagined, writing this particular book helped illuminate my path on a journey through acknowledging, accepting, forgiving, and ultimately liberating myself from a narrative that had in subtle ways continued to hold my psyche hostage for decades. We are all shaped by the circumstances of our lives. However, as Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl famously wrote, and a number of spiritual teachers have reiterated, we have the power to choose how we respond to whatever may occur. We can let our wounds cripple us, or we can allow them to inform and even transform us. I believe we all have a responsibility to let our voices be heard, to share our stories in order to help each other heal. Facing the darkness in our lives is how we rediscover the infinite force of our light.
Thank you, Dawn. Beautiful. Thanks for setting the stage. I will be talking with you, like I said, a little later, but now let's talk with Barry. Barry, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thanks for taking to the virtual stage here. So I wanted to start with you because you were obviously with Dawn throughout the entirety of this process, but not only that, you brought us a very helpful skill set to the table in that process, and that is you were an English teacher for 40 years. So what was it like collaborating with Dawn on this project?
Well, it was many things. It was great. I mean, I think Dawn is a really, really good writer, and so it's very moving to me to read her stuff. And then, of course, there are the little grammatical things that I can't help myself from correcting. So I was part of the editing team, I would say. But I would say the main thing that I contributed to this process was just being there for Dawn, because she went through a series of discoveries, sometimes of actual material, like hands-on material. But then there were the discoveries, which were shocking enough. And then there were the realizations that came after the discoveries, which were even deeper shocks. And so just being there for her when she went through all that stuff was probably my major role.
And how did you sort of, because you're supporting her, but you're also learning these things about somebody that you love. So how were you able to sort of navigate that and take care of yourself while also offering her some support?
Well, it's interesting because the beginning of our relationship was somewhat rocky. That was 40 to 50 years ago. But and it was really interesting to see how the events that occurred in her childhood, these traumas that occurred in her childhood, actually led to a lot of the things that went on in the early tumult of our relationship. So
Mm.
I got a lot more insight into that also, which was, you know, stuff I had to deal with then.
Right, right. But also probably helpful in a sense to get some answers
Absolutely.
that you weren't even necessarily expecting to get.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very helpful.
Is there a particular part of the book, other than the whole book, which of course is the ideal answer, but is there a particular part of the book that stands out for you?
Yeah, Goddess Descending, which is sort of the myth that Dawn wrote, she created as a way of sort of coping with and coming to terms with, and also transforming this experience. Every time, it's only like 3-4 pages long, but every time I read that, it just makes me cry, because really what it shows is not only her creativity, but also her ability to forgive and love people who have done horrendous things to her. So
Right.
it's very powerful.
Right. And we're going to talk about forgiveness later, because that is obviously such a central part of her experience and the book.
Okay.
How do you think Dawn grew as a result of going through this experience? I'm obviously going to ask her this as well, but from your perspective as her husband, there with her hand in hand through the process, how do you think she grew as a result of this?
Oh, I think it helped her process an enormous amount, because, you know, these are all sort of hidden things that are going on inside. And, you know, what you see are the manifestations. And so Dawn was very good at sort of coping and dealing with the manifestations, but to get back to the root sources and really find out what happened and grapple with that stuff, I think has really helped her. Well, I think it's helped her achieve a level of peace that I don't think would be otherwise possible at all.
Beautiful. Thank you, Barry. There are obviously many more questions I would ask you, but I feel like we're just getting started.
Right.
But I'm going to move now to Cecily Baptist. Cecily, are you?
Hi.
There she is. Welcome, Cecily. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
So, Cecily, you and Dawn are close friends. So it's been told to me. You are close friends who met in 1987 at a Moms Over 40 group when your daughters were babies.
Right.
And Dawn describes you to me as an ardent cheerleader for this book, as well as a diligent, encouraging, and helpful reader editor. Why did you encourage Dawn to write this book?
It's funny that you said cheerleader, because that was the word I wrote down for myself when I was thinking about this. I don't think anyone needed to encourage her to write it. She was going to write it. I think that my contribution was just to keep saying, it's really good. This is a story worth telling. And she told her story so well. So,
and why did you think, go ahead.
She would write it.
Yeah. Why did you think it was really good? What was it that was standing out that you got out the pom-poms and you were cheering from the sidelines there?
Right. She was able to take me into her story, and the people became real. She did a really good job at setting time and place in the early years. But more than that, she was able to bring me in at an emotional level. I connected with the story. It wasn't just out there somewhere, but she brought me in. And I think it's her use of language, but more, I think it's the honesty, the truth that's there.
Mm-hmm. So like I said, you have known her for decades. I think I said since 87. Is that what I said?
Right.
Yeah, since 87. So you've known her for a long time.
Yes.
What did you learn about her through this book that maybe you didn't know yet?
Actually, a lot. I didn't know her history. I didn't actually know she'd really been a professional actress.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly didn't know about her childhood. But the part that was really true, and that I totally knew, is that she's always been skilled at looking at things and seeking to understand them, and moving into the ability to think about things, hurts, harms with compassion. Mm-hmm. And that I've always known. That's who she is. So the facts were different, but the who she is totally
Right.
there.
Right. What do you think the main takeaway is for this book, from this book?
For me, it is that it's important to seek to understand either the harms that have been done to us or the harms we do to others. That if you take the time to understand them, then you can reach a level of compassion, because we are all faulty. But by understanding, you get to compassion. And then once you have compassion, you can let it go. You can be comfortable with the mistakes people made to us and the mistakes we make to others.
Right. Thank you very much, Cecily.
Sure.
So speaking of compassion, the next guest with whom I'm going to speak is Dr. Kenneth Tanaka. Dr. Tanaka, are you
here?
I see you. I see. There he is. Welcome. Thanks for being here. And I want to point out that Dr. Tanaka is coming to us all the way from Japan. So it's very early or late for you?
Early.
Quite early.
Quite early. Okay. Well, you're putting on a good face. You look very alert. So
Yes.
thank you again. Thank you again for being here. I know Dawn really appreciates it. Cecily just mentioned compassion. You are an ordained Jodo Shinsu Buddhist priest. How would this book be considered from a Buddhist perspective?
Well, first of all, can I say hello to Don and Barry?
Yes, absolutely.
I can.
Yes. It's a great sacrifice for me to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Now that I've been semi-retired, I don't get up till 8 o'clock every day.
Me
So
too.
2 hours. You owe me 2 hours, Anyway, I also want to say that I haven't seen them for quite some time. We met 40 years ago, and when I used to live in the States, we saw each other quite often. But in the last 20 years, since I've been teaching here, I haven't. But we kept in touch, and so Matthew. By the way, please call me Ken.
Okay.
No, they don't call me Dr. Tanaka, so I think it's more appropriate. So anyway, about compassion, can you say repeat the question again?
Well, I just know that I mean, I don't know a lot about Buddhism, but I think that compassion is sort of one of its primary tenets, right? And so I just thought, you're being a Buddhist priest, how would we sort of view Little Girl Found in sort of a Buddhist context?
Well, wisdom and compassion are two qualities of Buddhism, or at least the qualities of people who are so-called enlightened. The Buddha is often referred to as a person of great compassion and wisdom. But I think bringing it back to Dawn, I wanted to convey one experience that we had. 40 years ago, our daughter, who is now 34, when she was 1, she caught this very serious illness called Kawasaki disease. And I was a minister, part-time minister in Concord at a fellowship where they came, and that's how we met. And well, when she got ill, I mean, obviously we were quite concerned. And one day we came home from an outing, and we found this huge basket of food and drinks, and they were put there by Barry and Dawn. And it touched us so much that I have never forgotten it. And when she asks for a favor like this, getting up early in the morning, I said, sure enough, because that, so it's going back to your question, compassion is what I think I see in her, and her action of, doing something, driving all the way from Concord out to our place, which was about 20 miles away, for to present us with that present, to show how, which is an expression of her compassion. So her personality, who she is, exemplifies compassion.
And the book is sort of an extension of that. Is it safe to assume?
Oh, yeah. I think the fact that she was able to reconcile at the end is an indication of her compassion, because without that, she wouldn't be able to do that. So
Thank you very much, Ken. And I would tell you to go back to bed, but now that you're up, you might as well just stay with us for the rest of the time, right?
yes, I'll be happy to do that.
Okay. Can anyone get Ken some coffee? That might help. All right. Thank you very much, Ken. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Last but not least, before we talk with Don is Stefan Betts.
Hi there.
There he is, Stefan. I'm saying that right, Stefan?
Stefan is right.
Stefan is right. Okay, well, thanks for being here. You were the first person, I don't know if you know this or not, but you were the first person to read a draft cover, spiral bound draft copy, draft edition from cover to cover. And what was it that made that first edition that you read, that first draft that you read, hard to put down?
And in fact, I couldn't. I wrote that back to Don. I started reading it and then I thought I'll do maybe 2 hours max, right? I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
And there are 2 parts that just hooked me into the book. One was, I've never heard a story like this, right? I'm a clinician and I use attachment therapy. So I know about loss and early childhood trauma. I know about adverse childhood experiences. And what I'm trained in is to look at the trauma in early childhood as an event, not as an absence. But we do know, as clinicians, that the absence of attachment is what causes trauma. But nobody had ever written that part, except for Don when I started reading the book, in that way of abandonment, right? And I could see the through line through her life because I know Dawn at the same time, right? As I'm reading her book and I know Dawn. And it was almost like having her allow me to have a look into the inner reality that she was facing throughout her life, right? On the outside looking in, you would think Dawn, successful, happily married, great family. Grandkids are fantastic, by the way, folks. Hello. And then I was struck, even though that Dawn had shared some of the experiences before she wrote the book. She couldn't share everything because she didn't know all the details and all the events. And when I read the book, this was the first time where she shared everything, right? And I realized what kind of courage it had taken her, perseverance and sheer guts to not only put a family like hers together, the biological family, but also the spiritual family. And you see, even you, Matthew and Mike, you've been drawn into the circle. And who's here today is her family, biological. The others are her spiritual family, right? And we feel like that. We're connected to Dawn like that. And that was the second part that struck me in the book, the spiritual aspect, because we don't, in psychotherapy, we don't talk too much about spirituality and the role of spirituality or the role of being connected to a source. And that really got me in the book as not as a secondary reality, but the reality behind the reality, right? The reality behind the events for her.
Right.
And the fact that reality gave her the strength that was shining forth in the book.
Beautiful. Thank you, Stefan. Okay, so now, Dawn, if you would like to take center stage again, I would love to have a conversation with you. Okay, you can hear me, Dawn, just to make sure?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, we've some of the friends that I just interviewed and in your preface as well, we established it was the preface, right? Not the, yeah.
Preface.
Right. So you've touched on some of the themes and a little bit about what the book is about, but can you tell us just briefly at a high level, just kind of give us the high level synopsis of what the book is about?
Well, I think it's about me facing my childhood, my past, especially after I got a lot more details that I hadn't known before, and really letting myself take that in and feeling what the things that brought up saved us a lot of money in therapy, even though I'd already done a lot of therapy, different kinds of therapy. So I think it was about me kind of owning that and acknowledging that in a way I hadn't before. And also looking at ways that it had affected my life and my choices in life, looking at ways that I started that how blessed I was in life to find pathways to healing, and ultimately to realizing that well, I was looking at it from the perspective, you know, I'm 78 years old, so all that time ago, it's a long time, and I have different perceptions now and different perspectives, and I could see things from those perspectives. You know, like even about my birth mother and her choices. And then as the last chapter talks about, Thich Nhat Hanh, kind of listening to something that I'd heard before from him, saying how all this stuff comes down from our ancestors. And I realized how much pain she was in, how wounded she was, and her mother, and it all trickled down.
Right. Just to illustrate, just because I want to get just fairly concrete for people who might not already know, can you talk about, in the beginning of the book, there's an incident that sort of sets the stage where you're an infant and your mom isn't necessarily particularly taking the responsibility that she maybe should. Can you just tell us briefly about that incident? Because there's a lot that follows, but that again, sort of set the stage.
Well, I mean, the incident was that she left me for 3 days and nights. The police had to break into the house. I was rescued. I was hospitalized. But what I found out was that had gone on the whole first year of my life. She just wasn't there for me. She left me alone for hours. And there were a lot of documentation about that. And she was an alcoholic, I realized. Well, I realized that I knew that, but she was an alcoholic. So I think that combined with whatever her wounding was and her inability to bond with me was going on since I was born. And my grandmother once told me, when I asked her, she said, well, she was very disappointed when you were a girl because she wanted a boy. And I thought, my gosh, could my whole life have been different if I'd just been a male instead of female?
Right.
You know, so I mean, that was the incident.
Right. And lots followed, right? So the title and the subtitle, I want to touch on them briefly. Little Girl Found: How I Reclaimed Myself After Early Childhood Trauma. Can you speak a little bit to this notion that we lose part of ourselves or parts of ourselves during trauma, as a result of trauma, including neglect, and how in order to heal, we have to go find those parts and sort of reintegrate those parts?
I think it's true. Yeah. I'm sorry. Can you ask me the specific question again?
Well, just that notion, if you could just elaborate a little bit on
how I reclaimed myself.
Well, and just that notion that we actually lose parts of ourselves when we're traumatized, and then we need to go find them again and bring them back so that we can be whole again.
To reconcile. Yeah. Well, as you know, the book first had a whole different title. Then the next title was Little Girl Lost. And then I suddenly realized, no, she's found. It should be Little Girl Found, because I was lost, but now I'm found. I think that's something I remember from a song in my childhood. But yeah, so I think that it is possible. I think there was a child inside me that was wounded that I had never claimed. I had never, because I just shut myself out from that part of my life, you know. And I pretended for a long time. I had a fantasy about what happened. And then I had to realize that wasn't what actually happened. And then there were recurrent abandonments, as I'll read about in a while. But so yes. And then I had help reclaiming. I had help, which is in chapter 9, you know. Does that answer your question?
That answers my question. Yes, there are no wrong answers here. That's the good news. There are no wrong answers. So yes, so thank you for that. Part of that reclamation and part of that finding the pieces and bringing them back together was the actual process of writing. And I'm a writer as well, as you know, and so I, of course, am interested in that aspect of it. And in the preface, you talk about the healing power of writing, and you talked about how when you were dealing with ovarian cancer in your 50s, that's when you first sort of awoke to that notion of through writing we can find healing. Can you talk about writing as a healing process and how the actual process of writing this book was healing?
Very interesting, because like I wrote my book about having cancer, making friends with cancer, which was part of my healing process. This was completely different because it was going to stuff I wasn't even conscious of and bringing it up and looking at that. And it was like this excavation. But for a long time, I had practiced writing Natalie Goldberg style, where you just write. And in the process of writing, the memories that I had retained I remembered things that I hadn't remembered even about the thing I was writing about. Other things came up, just images, colors, sensory experiences. And I felt like, especially in some of the chapters, that the writing took over as a therapeutic tool, and just was quite amazing, actually, for me.
Part of this was we've already mentioned it a few times or alluded to it a few times, is you did do a lot of research and you had a lot of different kind of source materials. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? What sort of materials did you find and what did you discover that maybe you didn't have? And I know in some cases you did have some things that you revisited and then saw in a different light. So can you just tell us a little bit about the research that went into this?
Yeah, I didn't do a lot of research, like academic research, although I did a little bit of that, but I had a box, for instance, of letters from my father, between my father and my stepmother. I mean, dozens and dozens, probably 100 letters. I'd had them for a long time, but I'd never read them all. There's somebody here today, Carl and Marla will remember coming to the house one time and looking at all these letters lined up, and I read them one by one and I made little notes on them. But I think one of the main things that happened is that I got information from the Kentucky archives. I had done it. It was a little bit of sleuthing, I was trying to go back and back. I thought maybe I can get the police report. Maybe I can see what they did when I was in the hospital or how long I was there. And there was a woman there, Melissa Shields, who couldn't be here today, but I really acknowledge her she kept digging. She couldn't find the police report. Finally, she wrote me one day and she said, I think I found something that will answer some of your questions. And I finally got 25 pages of documents, and it was from the divorce proceedings, the depositions. And one of the depositions was with a woman who actually called the police, went to the house, found me, took me to the hospital. And she told what the house looked like, what was going on there, what time, all these things, which then, and then she went on, she talked about the trial, and she talked about the complaints that had come in from neighbors about my birth mother, and talked about, it was very revealing. So I would have to stop and cry or scream or do these various things while I was reading it. It took me days to read it.
Right.
And then there was a lot from my father, that he had told me some things, but not everything that I read. And my grandfather, it was a deposition with him. So that was probably the most revealing thing, and also the most difficult emotionally to read and sort through. But I was writing about it the whole time. So whatever happened, I would quickly write about it as it was happening.
Right. You also had you had access to typewritten notes from the children's home where you spent some time.
I did.
And I believe you're going to read an excerpt from the chapter where you talk about your experience in the children's home.
I will be glad to do that. Yes. Yes, I've edited this down a bit, and it's that's a fairly long chapter because there were many things, but I just picked a couple. So the first entry in the children's home summary file reads, 6/4/48. Stepmother Mrs. Armour came to the home to make arrangements for placing Dawn, as she wanted to travel with Mr. Armour, who plays with Ted Weems' band, and could not take Dawn with them. Her conscience seemed to bother her over leaving the child, but she finally decided the home was the place for her. Dawn is quite a sweet child. does not seem to have a sense of security. I have no recall regarding the actual move into the home, though it must surely have been unsettling and confusing. I must have felt powerless as I was forced to adjust to yet another change into being left in that huge, imposing brick building with no familiar spaces or faces. Early on, something happened in the playroom one day when we were left unsupervised, and the upset had escalated, which led to the following scene. We children have nothing on but our bleached white underpanties. We are all being made to walk in a circle in front of the wall of dark wooden cubbies that hold our clean underwear and pajamas. Mrs. Hamilton is pacing back and forth, waving the large red wooden paddle, which usually hangs on a hook on the side of the cubbies. She's demanding that one of us tell her what happened, but nobody speaks. She's making us walk faster and faster until we're almost prancing like little ponies, and before long we are all crying. I can't be certain if the paddle was actually used on any one of us that night or if it was simply brandished as an imminent possibility, nor do I remember who or what brought closure to this incident or how we all made it into our beds. 9/7/48, Dawn entered kindergarten today. A memory from that day remains vivid. A frail-looking boy whose hair was as white as clean snow began crying inconsolably as soon as his mother left. His despair may have eclipsed my own uneasiness, or perhaps I perceived a kindred spirit. I felt compelled to comfort him and stuck to him like glue the rest of the day. He eventually stopped crying, though I don't think he ever smiled. When it was time to roll out our rugs on the hardwood floor for quiet time, he and I laid down next to each other, and I kept my attention on him the entire time. When they passed out the graham crackers and milk, our mutual dislike of the crackers and refusal to eat them seemed to increase some unspoken bond that helped us both survive the first day of being thrown together with strangers in a strange land called kindergarten. In retrospect, I recognize that my sensitivity to loneliness and suffering in others first began to manifest in my encounter with this white-haired, never to be forgotten little boy. And one other lucid memory I'll read. I'm in the last bed at the end of the dormitory, past the several empty beds next to the fire escape. This isolation is how Mrs. Hamilton punishes any of us who have done something she deems unacceptable. I'm having trouble getting to sleep in the bed, but I don't feel afraid, just a little more alone than usual. I'm looking out of the high windows when I hear a voice coming out of the moon, the full moon, just as a cloud passes over it. I decide it must be God. The voice is comforting somehow, and I feel less alone. It feels as if I now have a secret protector.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if, you talked about how as part of the writing process, it helped to bring back things that you'd forgotten, that sort of thing. I'm wondering, did reading this information, when you would get this new information or even sometimes revisit information that you had, but like I said, sometimes it sounds as if you saw it in a different light from where you are today, did that help you with memory recall, or was it mostly just getting facts almost in the third person and just adding them to the puzzle?
Oh no, it definitely helped me. And it was as
Yeah.
if I was reliving it again,
Mhm.
as if it was happening again to me. And
And
so
how-
at that point I could feel things in my body and sometimes, yes, sometimes if something else would come up about it, I would remember it even more vividly. I know memorists say that you can't remember at that age, but I have such vivid memories that have been the same over decades.
Mhm.
And but I'd never written them down before, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so you
better.
said that the writing helped you to deal with this, the new information that you're remembering and reading both. But what else did you do? Because there's obviously so much that's coming at you all at once. How else did you kind of navigate all this new information that's coming at you? A lot of it really, really unpleasant.
Oh, I just let myself feel all those things that I'd never felt. There were times when I was actually curled up in a fetal position, sobbing for a long time and just reliving it. And sometimes I was on my feet, hissing and growling and punching and kicking. And it was kind of amazing, the stuff that came out of me, and it released energy in me that I didn't even know was there.
Right. Right. So we focus mostly sort of early on in your infancy, and then when you were in the children's home. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit, or go maybe a little bigger picture, I guess, for this kind of my next couple of questions. Because we've just talked about how you dealt with in the immediacy, in the moment when you're getting this new information, how you were dealing with that, the different ways you did that. But later in the book, you have a section called, or a chapter rather, called Portals to Awakening, where you talk about how meditation helped you as you got older and sort of came into your own and dealt with a lot of the past and became happy and healthier, and integrated, again, a lot of the stuff from your past, how meditation helped with that, partnered meditation, is that what partner assisted meditation, enlightenment intensive. So you talk about that in your Portals to Awakening chapter. And then in I think 2 chapters later, you have Stepping Stones on the Path. And in that chapter, you talk about 3 specific things that you do and that we can do as well, the readers can do: gratitude, blessings, and forgiveness. And I think it was Barry who mentioned forgiveness early on, and I said we were going to touch on that again. Can you speak to, because again, it's so key to your story, can you speak to the transformational power of forgiveness and how it does fit into your story?
Mhm. Yeah, let me just read the 2 little
Epigraphs.
quotes at the beginning of the forgiveness part, because to get into that. Oops, I'm still on blessing. Yeah, this is so crucial. Forgiveness is giving up the hope that the past could have been different. True forgiveness is when you can say thank you for that experience.
Yep.
And the other quote is from Frank Ossieski. Forgiveness is a way to set down old pain. It liberates us from the wounds of our past. So I think they said it better than I said it probably, but I mean, that is exactly what happened. And it was what I had hoped would happen in writing the book. But when I realized, I realized there was nothing to forgive. That's what really came to me ultimately, that I've always felt that we are all doing the very best we can at any moment in our lives. And for me to wish that my story had been different, or my birth parents had been different, it seemed absurd, because if everything in my life that happened up to now hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be who I am. I'd still be what I am, but I wouldn't be who I am. And so I couldn't, it just dropped away. And it was like this huge weight was just lifted from me, psychically, or sort of emotionally, psychologically. I got up and danced around the room. I moved in ways I hadn't been able to move for several years. I just felt it was like I was thrown into another dimension.
So for you, you had a moment where, like you said, it just kind of fell away and you were able to forgive, and you realized, I think, again, you said something along the lines of there was nothing to forgive, right? But I'm wondering, now that you've had that experience, so many of us struggle to forgive, right? We don't necessarily get to that point, even though we might want to get to that point. Do you have any advice for people who are maybe still holding on and can't quite get there, whomever they might need to forgive? Any advice on getting to the point where you're able to forgive?
Didn't know you were going to ask that question, Matthew.
You didn't know I was going to ask any of these questions.
I know. No, it's a longer, I was going to put an appendix in the book, actually, a forgiveness meditation, which I now wish I had put in, but maybe it'll be another book. I mean, I've done a lot of forgiveness meditations and led forgiveness meditations, kind of based on Stephen Levine's work. And I think forgiveness doesn't mean that the person didn't do something hurtful, or that we would consider wrong, but it just means that you're letting it go. So it's not taking up space in your psyche, your mind, your heart. And I found I had forgiven my birth mother, I thought, when she came to me after she died, and she appeared to me, which is in a book that somebody who's here today wrote. I thought I had forgiven her. I kept saying, I forgive you, I forgive you. And then I realized I hadn't really. And so I think forgiveness comes on levels, and it can get deeper and deeper. But you know, you can just start with simple meditative practices about forgiveness, forgiving somebody else, or saying you're sorry to someone that you feel you have wronged in some way. Not that you can see them in person, but you can say that to them out loud or in writing, or, you know, there's a lot of different ways one could do that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I love that distinction you make. And we don't have time to go further with that, but I just want to say that I love that distinction you make between thinking we've forgiven versus actually forgiven, and the fact that there can be kind of different levels until you really have. And like you said, that's probably when it falls away. So thank you for that. So last question, easier than the one, although you did really well on that last question. But the last question is, and I think I asked one or two of the other people this question, but I want to ask you this question since it is your book. What do you hope people take away from this book?
I wrote this down because I thought you might ask me.
Okay, this one's too easy, maybe. Okay. Yeah.
No, you know, well, first of all, that it's possible to grow and heal from our suffering, and that it all depends on how we choose to respond to it. And I think that the process of writing itself is a very, the takeaways, it's a very powerful tool that costs nothing and can help us integrate. It's been proven, actually, research has proven that writing can help you integrate parts of the brain that are affected in a long-term way by childhood trauma. And I think that it's never too late to make peace with our past or to reconcile with the wounded child within us. And I think also a big thing is that when we share our stories, we help each other heal. I mean, my story is so less traumatic than so many people's stories, I feel. I mean, I wasn't physically tortured, you know, I wasn't sexually tortured. I mean, my heart breaks when I think of all the children who have been abused in so many different ways. And yet I needed to tell the story. And I think that by sharing our stories, we help everyone, all of us, we help each other heal.
We do indeed. So thank you for the help that you are offering us and everyone else who picks up the book. Thank you. Okay, so Dawn is going to take questions now, but I'm going to say a couple of things before we get to the questions. So if you have questions, now would be the time to throw them into the chat. And if you don't, I always have more questions that I can ask. But if you do, now's the time to enter them in the chat window, and I'll look at those in just a moment. But a couple of things I want to say is, first of all, I want to thank everyone again for being here. Whether it's your time zone or whether you got up really early or stayed up late, we really appreciate it. I also want to mention, of course, that Little Girl Found is available in paperback and ebook, not only on Amazon, but bookshop.org, which is a great way to support the indies. It's on all the other online retailers, or at least it's in the process if it's not yet. And of course, you can also go to your local bookstores and order it there. We do have that sort of distribution. So please do that. Much appreciated. The other thing is, if you like the book and are inspired and moved by the book, if you could leave a review on Amazon, that is indispensable to a book's success. And it doesn't have to be a detailed critique. A lot of times friends who want to leave reviews for me, they're like, well, I haven't finished it yet. You know, no, just a couple sentences. I really like this book. It really touched me, whatever. And 4 or 5 stars really, really helps to legitimize a book and show people that it's worthwhile. So thank you for that. And I think that's all I've got. Dawn, shall we take questions?
Sure.
Do you have anything to add before we take
comments, questions? Yeah.
Okay.
Then I'll have a chance to thank people, right?
Then you'll have a chance to thank people. Yes, at the end. Okay. So let me change this here. Dun, dun, dun. Everyone in meeting. Okay. So I don't see any questions yet. So I'm going to ask you about the dedication, because you dedicated the book, quote, to myself, my ancestors, and my descendants, as well as all survivors of life-shaping trauma, and for all who yearn for reconciliation. On the surface, it might seem odd to dedicate a book to ourselves. Can you tell us why you started with that?
Well, because it started out that I was doing it for myself.
Yep.
I mean, it was something that I felt I could do for my own growth, my own personal growth. And I didn't even know I was gonna, I thought, well, maybe it'll just be for my family, you know, and then it turned into a book that Cecily and other people kept telling me had to get published.
So initially you weren't even necessarily doing it with an eye to publication. It was more an exercise for your own healing.
Right, in the beginning. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we have a couple questions here. Dawn, this is from Carrie and Jay. Did you find any other readings on forgiveness particularly helpful or misguided?
Ooh, or misguided.
Or misguided.
Well, at the back of my book, there's recommended reading, and I think there's 1 or 2 books on forgiveness in there. I'd have to think about the misguided part. But yes, there are some good books. I'm trying to find you. Where are you there? There are some good books on forgiveness, which we could, yeah, I could let you know. Maybe other people know too.
Well, they can look in the bibliography. Like
well, yeah, it's just a recommended reading, but right.
Yeah.
I do know, but thank you for the question. Carl, that was Carrie and Jay.
That was Carrie and Jay. Carrie and Jay. We have another question here from B. What is the most important revelation you got while working on the book?
Wow. Just one? Well, the revelation is that I was never not what I am. I was never not loved. I was never not innocent. It was not my fault. Because my whole thing was, I'm not good enough. Because I'm not good enough. I'll never be loved enough. I'll never be able to please. I'll never be good enough to be loved. So the big revelation was I was already good enough. I was always good enough.
That's a powerful revelation. Meg has something she would like to say. So Meg, I just unmuted you if you would like to share.
Yeah, I just want to say, I'm going to try and do this without crying, but I probably won't be able to. I'm just so proud of my mom. I am the adult daughter in the preface, who was talking about this and realized that I didn't have all the information, of course, and no one did. And I think for a while, I was also part of the editing team. And I think for a while I was not nervous, but I thought that this was more of a passion project for my mom. Not that it wasn't also that, but that it was more like a journal and that it wouldn't necessarily connect with other people who didn't know her as well as her family and close friends did. And I'm really glad to see that I was wrong about that, because I think your writing is really beautiful, Mom. And I think that you obviously are able to connect with people no matter how much or little they know you. And I just love that you were able to work through all this in this way and share that with people who might need to do that or want to do that for themselves too. And I like that it shows that it's never too late for you to do that. So I'm just really proud of you and I love you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meg. Stefan has a question. Dawn, did you find that compassion increased your engagement with yourself and others? And if yes, how did that look like in terms of relationships? Do you want me to read it again? Did you find that compassion increased your engagement with yourself and others? And if yes, how did that look like in terms of relationships?
For sure, I think compassion, I mean, that's a good point about myself, because I have more compassion for myself now, for sure. And I think that's partially as a result of writing the book. And of course, the other part of the Enlightenment Intensive chapter is about my work with the elderly, the ill, and the dying. And I think that I was drawn to that work because these people were lonely, they were not being seen, they were not being heard, and I could really feel that and have compassion for them in a way that I felt I wasn't seen, I wasn't heard. I wanted to provide that for them, tried to provide that for my children as well. But my compassion, losing sight of the question maybe, but I mean, I think, yes, it definitely did affect my relationship with myself and others, to realize, the whole book and what it came to increased my compassion. And I'm always trying to increase my compassion with various ways that I do that, because I think it's huge. I think it's, I just think it's a spiritual practice to keep increasing that.
Indeed it is. Okay, so we have 2 comments here. I think one's a comment, not a question. Yeah, so thank you for sharing. This is from Bonnie Burt. Thank you for sharing your deeply personal, moving story. It is so timely because Yom Kippur in the Jewish calendar is the time to think about forgiveness, not always easy to do. Thank you for an example of how to go about it. And then David Epstein has a question. How might your book be assistant? How might your book be assistant to therapists and their clients? Your process of discovery seems very compelling, but many survivors may not have the resources, the time, support, financial, that you brought to your personal discoveries. Being able to appreciate that, quote, we are all doing the best we can, is to me a real touchstone. Please comment and congratulations. So again, how might your book be of assistance to therapists and their clients, particularly in light of the fact that some might not have the kind of resources that you do?
Wow, that is a big question. Maybe Dave and I should have a whole conversation about that. I mean, obviously the writing part, to get people to write, I think is important. I mean, there's now all these therapists, and most of the books that have been written are by therapists, which is one reason I felt compelled to sort of write my story. I mean, there are other stories out there about terrible trauma, but yeah, I think there's so many therapists now that are using different techniques, and since the ACE thing came up and the disassociate thing, where I didn't know about any of these terms when I first started writing the book. And then I discovered many, many books, which I didn't have time to read, by therapists. So there's a lot of those out there. And I think probably given the time, Dave, you and I can have a conversation about that later.
All right, so that's the short answer, and we'll take that conversation offline, but thank you again for the question, Dave. And it looks as if, unless anyone has a last minute question, I think we're about to wrap up the questions. Thank you again for the questions. Thanks for being here. And I know, Dawn, you had some parting words.
Matthew, I think Goldie wants to make a comment, but she's muted. Yes,
Where's
Goldie would like to make a
Let's
comment.
see. Is Goldie waving? Because I don't have.
She is waving. She was waving.
All right.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask Dawn a very selfish question, which is, are you going to do an audio book for those of us that are visually impaired? Would you consider doing that?
I would definitely consider doing it. I'm looking into it.
Great. That's lovely.
I would love to do that, actually. But we'll see. I have to investigate that. I haven't had a chance yet. But thank you for...
Thank you very much for letting me ask the question. And the whole thing moved me so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Goldie.
Okay, Dawn, I think it's time for parting words. If you have, I know you had some that you wanted to share.
I'm so grateful for everybody I see here. It's like, my cousins, I have cousins here. I have grandchildren here. I have my old time friends that I've known for years. And I have people from spiritual community and people from very school community where I substitute taught for a little while and worked in the library. I mean, thank you so much, everybody. Sally, Julian looks like he might be here. I'm just like blown away by everybody that's here, and people from my chorus and people. So I love you all, and I just so much appreciate you honoring me by coming and to get to see you in this way. And I just, I love you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks again.